It seems we've been talking about and somewhat around interoperability in every lecture in this MOOC so far. It certainly tops everyone's list of what is needed for value-based care to succeed. But I've chosen to address interoperability in the middle of this course for several reasons. One is that the healthcare industry has been working on interoperability for a long time with less than stellar success. There is no silver bullet or magic wand to make this happen. So who wants to start out a course with a topic where success is not imminent, let alone assured to a very high degree? Second, I actually believe that while there is much we can and should and are doing about interoperability, I also think identifying it as the biggest stumbling block to success with value-based care is something of a scapegoat or excuse that can be used should other aspects of value-based care not be successful. Even if we could nail interoperability completely, I'm not convinced it is the total panacea to all that is needed for value-based care to succeed. Hence, we need to put the challenges of interoperability into their proper perspective. But having expressed my concerns up front here, I do want to address interoperability from all possible angles, especially since it appears we may find that solutions to interoperability can come about in ways not thought about previously. So in this first lecture in Unit 6, we are going to define the types of interoperability challenges, look at the standards development organizations and their current standards, discuss what the federal government and especially the Office of the National Coordinator for Health IT or ONC is doing in interoperability, and focus on some promising areas where inroads are being made. In the second lecture in Unit 6, we're going to focus on analytics, which is significantly impacted by interoperability. Comparing data to big data, looking at the data analytics life cycle, considering ways to bring data analytics to the point of care, and how analytics and especially artificial intelligence is critical in making value-based care decisions. Interoperability may be described from four main perspectives. While each is unique, there is a flow from technical interoperability that simply enables the exchange of data between two disparate systems to semantic interoperability where the data being exchanged are made more understandable through use of common vocabularies, to workflow interoperability where there is consistency of data processes that can be trusted across data sharing entities, and finally to policy interoperability that ensures that each of the three components just described are fully implemented and working effectively. We'll take a look at each one of these more closely. But the statements that we've used here to illustrate each of these forms of interoperability may help you further distinguish between them and bring home the practical ramifications of lack of interoperability. So the statements, I can't get data to you and I can't get data from you, and this is not my patient or member, are statements that describe the issue of technical interoperability. Providers have technical interoperability issues within their own organizations as different systems, often though not necessarily from different vendors, do not share data without sophisticated and costly programming that we call interfaces to make such exchange happen. And even then, the exchange is generally in a limited way. Only certain data elements are exchanged or only with certain specific systems. Many providers are overcoming these issues by moving toward a single vendor for all systems. But as providers want to share data with other providers, and providers and health plans want to exchange data, especially for value-based care, the issue of technical interoperability once again rears its ugly head. And in these cases, an interface is not the solution. If for no other reason, then which of the two entities attempting to exchange data will pay for the interface to be written? They're separate legal entities. The statements next, we don't understand each other's data, you're not adopting standards, reflect concerns and accusations regarding lack of semantic interoperability. Made especially complex by the high degree of clinical technology that imposes the most detailed and specific nuances in describing disease states, diagnostic study modalities, treatments, etc., etc. Our vocabularies are not for the faint of heart. The next set of statements, your data are different than I expected. I don't trust your data. I don't want my patient's data. Although these statements may reflect issues with semantic interoperability, they are also issues of different processes and workflows. We saw in a previous lecture that data for quality measures may reflect measurements taken at different points in a workflow. Lack of trust in data could reflect both degree of data quality, but also concerns about security measures that are in place that may vary across the entities exchanging data. Finally, data from patients, such as recorded in a diary or compiled from multiple different providers, are often more paper-based or app-based and hence cumbersome to view via an import into an EHR. The final set of statements, I want your data, but you can't have my data. My patients don't want me to share their data, are just a few of the policy issues that can arise whether or not we have perfect technical, semantic, and process interoperability. In fact, policy interoperability issues may be the most difficult challenges to overcome going forward. Let's look at a brief history of technical interoperability and describe where we are today with how we exchange data in healthcare. Initially, data exchange was within a given provider entity, point to point from one system, such as a registration, admission, discharge, transfer system, to another, such as the laboratory information system, often, as we said before, with a costly interface. Even when two systems were sold by the same vendor, there was still the possibility that an interface was required because the vendor may have acquired systems from other vendors to sell or simply did not hardwire an interface between the two systems. This situation is still somewhat prevalent in provider settings. When providers electronically exchange transactions with health plans, the exchange is also point to point, but providers pay a clearinghouse, a company, to convert non-standard transaction formats into standard formats, which are then routed to health plans. And health plans do the same in reverse to send these transactions to the responses back to providers. Anything more complex than one of the revenue cycle transactions is handled by phone or paper, or sometimes via website. Plans have created to offer a bit more information on certain of the transactions, as we previously discussed. As health systems have grown with many providers having systems from different vendors, data are often moved to a central data warehouse for quality measurement and uses other than direct patient care. Many, though not all, health systems are starting to use an enterprise-wide electronic health record or EHR system, so all will be on the same platform, although there continue to be some but fewer interoperability issues. Certain types of data exchanges remain challenging, particularly surrounding diagnostic images, even though there are readers that supposedly overcome these issues, and they don't, and exchanges between hospitals and independent physicians, obviously due mostly to different EHR vendor systems in their organizations. As providers started wanting to exchange data with other providers, two things were considered. Patients could help the exchange by not just requesting that records be sent to another provider, usually via paper or on a CD, but perhaps through a personal health record. This was not very successful because PHRs also lacked interoperability. Few patients were interested in compiling their own records. Most providers did not trust patient-created or even patient-managed data, and many physicians did not want the liability for reading through a person's life history. The second possible thing that was being considered were health information exchange organizations. These were created that received a daily feed of certain data from participating providers, often emergency department data, medication lists, etc. These operate and charge much like financial administrative clearinghouses and include normalization of data as part of their sales. This is where inconsistently formatted or not standardized information and routing data are normalized. Health information exchanges have been only moderately successful because providers do not want to have to pay for something they were previously getting for free, albeit via paper or in emergencies, a phone call. Many providers are reluctant to allow plans access to data in health information exchanges, considering more access to not be minimum necessary. Although in some cases plans are being given access to certain data specified in advance in their contracts, and this has been somewhat successful. So let's move forward and address what is currently happening in each form of interoperability. With respect to technical interoperability and its standards, we should start by noting that standards development organizations, often called SDOs, are nonprofit entities that use interested volunteers, largely from IT vendors, to develop consensus-based standards. The following are the most commonly used standards development organizations in healthcare. The American National Standards Institute, or ANSI, Accredited Standards Committee, ASC, X12, develops standards for financial administrative transactions that we have talked about previously, such as for claims, eligibility verification, etc. Health Level 7, or HL7, is used for clinical transactions, primarily within provider settings, but now being called upon to address data sharing across disparate provider settings and even with health plans. The National Council for Prescription Drug Programs, or NCPDP, develops standards for retail pharmacy transactions, including prescriptions, as well as transactions between pharmaceutical manufacturers and the retail pharmacies for inventory management, etc. Digital Imaging and Communications in Medicine, or DICOM, is the standards development organization for storing and transmitting medical images such as X-rays, scans, etc. Current standards provide a series of predefined logical formats for packaging data for a transaction in the form of messages to be transmitted among computers. For example, HL7 messages are comprised of segments that relay directions for exchange and content of exchange. A message header segment, for example, specifies the standard being transmitted. Then there is an event information segment that identifies the message it is relaying, such as information about an admission. Next may be a patient identification and demographics segment, then an observations and results segment, and so forth. In general, standards are not interoperable with one another. The most successful exception to this is an agreement between HL7 and NCPDP for standards used in exchanging prescriptions between EHRs and retail pharmacies, which has been adopted under the Meaningful Use Incentive Program. There is also potential collaboration between HL7 and ASC X12 for exchanging attachments. We talked about it previously, the additional information required to adjudicate claims or for prior authorization of services or referrals. This is yet to be finalized or adopted and may never be finalized and adopted if newer options become more successful.